All set.
Welcome everyone to this evening's policy subcommittee. We are going to be starting with the wellness policy, specifically around physical education. And Michelle Herman is going to be explaining where we're currently at there.
So as far as I understand, and hi, everybody. As far as I understand, that we have updated this policy to match the new state guidelines and any other additional national guidelines that had been needed to increase the ability for the policy to help us guide our physical education, and that this is specifically one piece of the entire wellness policy. And so this was adding in language around inclusivity for students. And there's Carlin, and I'm actually going to let her fill in any pieces. But Carlin, we just got to the point where we were talking about this being one piece of the entire wellness policy. And if you want to talk to where anything about this new language that's been added in here, it would be probably more helpful than me doing it.
Can I just ask a clarifying question before
Sure.
you start, Carlin? When I looked at it,
Absolutely.
there were, I think, 4 different colors of edits, and I
Mhm.
wasn't sure what was which. And
Yeah, so
I only see pink, but I do see a lot of comments.
just for clarity, we're
I
talking
saw
about,
yellow, red, blue, and purple, I think.
yeah, because we're still working on the actual wellness policy as a whole, right?
Okay.
So
Yep.
this is a section of the wellness policy. Whereas I think that before there was a physical education policy that was another part, right, David? Remember we on 216. So I was sent that document, so I thought that we were discussing that. But it sounds like we're discussing the section of a wellness policy. And I just want to make sure, are we letting it live in both areas, and they should match each other? If we have physical education policy, it should match.
There's an email that we received from Tricia Laham suggesting that we should. It's her strong preference that we maintain a separate physical education policy and then also address physical education within wellness.
Okay, so
I'm sorry. Before you start, what document should we be looking at? Is it the PDF or the Word doc? Is it the wellness policy draft Word doc that David sent, or is it one of the 2 docs that Betsy sent?
I think we should look at the document that David, that you sent, if that's the one that's
Okay.
It has like lots of people's comments,
That's okay.
a lot about nutrition, a lot about food services,
The
because
Word doc that's been marked up. That's what we should be looking at.
yeah, because that's the one that has the most of the it's in draft form at the moment, and I guess you want my thoughts and opinions on that portion of the policy, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Sorry. Thank you.
No, that's fine. I mean, that was I mean, I'm actually just sorry. I'm trying to get it real quick. Okay, here we go. So I think it's the one that says voted 619, and there's lots of comments in the corner. So section 3, entitled physical education. I'm just going down. Health education, physical education, and physical activity. So we cleaned it up a little bit by adding like intramural and extramural sports, because originally it just said, I think it said originally just intramural. And then we also talked about in paragraph 2, most of the edits are in purple, if that helps anyone. Does that help people? If they see most of the edits are in purple. So we said designee and or parent or caregiver or designee from the principal in paragraph number 2. Paragraph number, then when under physical education, I just made sure that was in line with what we're doing at the high school. So it says in grades 10 through 12, the requirement may be also met through the sports contract, but that the 9th grade students must take the lifetime wellness class. That's all in the course catalog. That's all graduation requirements. So I just made sure that that was current. Then we were recommended through the HECAT, through the, not the HECAT, through the assessment that we did, it was recommended that we give a time for physical education. So I just did what we currently have, which is a minimum of 40 minutes for the K through 8 per week, because that's the prep period. So I just kept it in line with the current contract and what we are currently doing. I didn't add any extra. They already see PE twice a week for a minimum of 40 minutes. Some grade levels are a little bit more, but I just kept it in line with that. And then we added the E block where it says physical education classrooms, whether inside or outside, will receive priority when shared facilities present a conflict. So that was added as we learned through COVID, especially through COVID, that, first of all, we should be teaching PE outside more. And we also wanted to make sure that when there are lots of groups using different spaces, that the physical education, the classroom environment, the classroom teaching environment, whether it be in a gym or in a outdoor facility, receive priority, as you would want for any classroom educational environment. And then under the health ed, we kept it pretty much the same, just added that we aim to do a comprehensive K through 12 health education program, it was on the former policy. It had identified in the former policy that grade 6 needed to be added. We took that out and we wrote PSB recognizes the need for implementing a comprehensive programming beginning in the elementary grades, so that we didn't lock ourselves into saying we have to put it in grade 6 or grade 5. Currently, the only thing we have for health education is grade 7 and 8. And then we have a 5th grade intro adolescence unit in grade 5. There's no 6th grade health. And then we have the 9th grade class. The daily recesses in here, as well as the integrating movement throughout the day. I don't feel like that's necessarily within my physical education purview, because physical education is not recess and recess is not physical education. However, I think it's in this section because it does talk about physical activity throughout the day. Does that make sense? I think it was there because it was also followed by some integration of movement and also a social emotional well-being. There was integration of movement throughout the day. I don't know if that's helpful to everyone or if that was too much.
That's
too
very
little
helpful.
information.
Just a couple questions I have. So regarding 6th grade health education, I recall that when we last spoke about this, DESE has 6th grade health education's requirements. Is that correct?
That's a good question for me to know the answer to. I do not know the answer to that, but I'm going to find out. We have it definitely a 5th grade puberty education requirement for sure. And I can find out if it's required. I mean, there's standards, of course, at every level, but whether it's required by the state in 6th grade, I have to find that out. It was identified as a need by the program review in 2010. So, but I should find out the answer to that, David. I don't know it at the exact moment.
Right. I think it might have also been an issue that we have an existing policy elsewhere that stated affirmatively that there was health education in grade 6. And so we were also looking at having alignments between our policies and our current practices. I think this came up in the context of drug use education.
Okay.
How close are we to perhaps adding health requirements for 6th grade, regardless as to what DESE is saying? It looks like, Michelle, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Well, so in terms of adding it, a couple of things, we're not staffed for it and we won't be staffed for it next year in terms of scheduling. I mean, it's just not, and curriculum for it. I have questions about, what are the commitments we're making? I don't see it as required right now. I was looking at Desi. I see it as there are standards. So I don't think we've even begun that planning yet. But I
think,
actually had a
David,
couple questions. I had a couple of
David, I
questions.
think
Go ahead.
what you were referencing in around the other policies that we have, I do think that there was an identified need to get something into sixth grade, David, especially based on that substance use policy that we were looking at. We identified a need because we used to have some sort of education in sixth grade that would go into science around substance use, and we identified it as a little bit of a need, especially because there's no the students get some form of health education in fifth grade, then there's nothing in sixth grade, and then they don't get it again until seventh and eighth. So I personally think there's a real need there. I know that we're going through program review with the middle school program review, and I know that people were saying like out of that would come hopefully a little bit more structure comprehensively across the district for every school, because sort of how advisory is being used and how different scheduling things are being used. It's not there, but I think there's a need for it. And I will say that I believe that we should have it at least maybe, maybe something that could be less than 2 days a week or something where we get to see the students again and help them with their health education, especially around substance use, healthy decision-making, and everything that we're seeing with mental health as well. I think that's a really big need.
Can I ask a general question here, just so I can be supportive of the process of what you're trying to do? So this is a much bigger policy piece today, the document, than what I thought we were looking at. And so I just there are things I have questions about in parts of this. So I just want to make sure that like I'm in line with what you're talking about today. Are you looking at this entire policy, or are you looking at just that smaller section that described sort of like the athletics piece?
So for now, just looking at the athletics piece, and the reason why we're doing that is when we had this discussion previously, and Kyle from athletics was also present for that, we were wondering whether we needed to have a separate standalone physical education policy. Some suggested maybe just including it into wellness and eliminating it. Tricia Laham strongly feels that it should be a standalone policy. If we're going to leave it as a standalone policy, which I'm fine with, I trust her recommendation, I do think we at least want to make sure that the language is compatible between what's being worked on within wellness and what it would say in the physical education policy. I think currently they're quite similar, although this portion in wellness is certainly significantly longer.
Yeah,
And more from the perspective of how we synthesize it.
Yeah, and I have some questions about the physical education things and like purpose of a policy and the level of detail that falls in this, just in how that would be suddenly impact other content areas.
Yes.
And would you want, I just to
What do you
put it
mean
out.
by other content
So
area?
to put it out there, like putting a physical education class will occur twice a week for a minimum of 40 minutes. If we have every content area dictate in the policy how many minutes it has, we will not have enough minutes in the day to have that happen. Like, even though that was
what was recommended to us to do.
There's a difference between a guideline and a policy.
Okay.
I guess my
But it was
question on physical
recommended to put it
education,
in
is there a state requirement saying it has to be 40 minutes? Does the state give some?
No,
There are
but
no
it was
state requirements on any minutes for any content area.
Right.
Well,
I have to say I had the same thought that Michelle did. Do we need a policy statement on a minimum time on learning for physical education? Because that's gonna
there is a PE requirement though, but what is the PE requirement then, Michelle? Because there is one that's required by state.
It's required that students get PE, but that's it. So the state used to have specific time on learning identified for every content area. And then they removed that for precisely the reason that we would have here. So if like literacy would like 120 minutes a day, if we put in, 120 minutes a day in a literacy, we in our policy on curriculum for literacy and X number of minutes for math, we will run out of time in our day to meet all of those minutes.
Is there
And
any
so-
school that's not getting 40 minutes times 2?
No.
No.
Every
Okay.
school's getting that. That's like the bare minimum, because I basically did the contract, because it tends to be the kids are at PE when the teacher's having their prep, right? So I kept it at the bare minimum in terms of.
But
And
yeah,
it was also suggested when we were going through the process, the wellness committee was going through the process, and we did the assessment of the wellness policy. It was suggested in that assessment to put minutes on it to make it time-based. And so that's why we did that. So we were working through the assessment, and then we were saying, oh, we were following the guidelines of the assessment. So that's why it's there, just to give you a reason for why it's
Sorry,
there.
Carlin, what assessment are you referring to?
We used a WellSat assessment. So with Tricia Lahame and the other people on the wellness committee, we used a WellSat assessment, and we went through it. This has been like a 5, 6, 7 month process. So I don't think we're done with the wellness policy. That's why I think there is some more room for us sort of firming it up.
But that assessment is, can you just describe that assessment tool?
So we used it, I can send it to you.
Sure.
We used it last spring, and it had different sections, and it was, basically we rated different parts of our policy, what was missing, what was in our policy, what was missing. We looked at other policies that, had great criteria and met what they believe to be a comprehensive wellness policy. So we've been looking at other
I see.
policies. So it's really was, it was a,
Time on learning was something that was in what was determined to be a good practice.
for the
wellness
one that we
policy.
looked at, and there was tons of stuff about the food services and
But
nutrition education. Like there was a lot in
I
that.
just want to say I'm not opposed to stating time on learning for PE. I just want to, if we do that, I could see us wanting to do that for a lot of different subjects, which I'm also not opposed to. I just would want to make sure that OTL could map a lot of that stuff out.
we would not, right.
I'm not
I'm
pushing
worried
back
about,
against, I'm not pushing back against having that
Yeah.
policy in general. I just want to make sure that OTL is involved in mapping all that stuff. I'd love to have time on learning and lots of policies, actually.
but
That
it would
be-
help to mop it out all at once and then
Yeah,
create
that's
policies,
all.
not do it this way. Because the other, I guess the reason I'm asking is I think that, and maybe this is because I'm not sure, like, I look at some of these things and I recognize that they may have come out of the assessment, but I worry about them being put in here as policy. And I've told Carlin this. I have the same question about letter C. And things that the state already require us to do. We should not have anybody not certified teaching courses. Like that's just, so does it belong in the policy? And I also wonder about the sort of stating about the professional development that they will attend, but our contract doesn't require people to attend. So those are just some of
Letter
the
C?
things that, yeah.
What was letter C? I don't see letter
You
C.
mean letter B? Are you talking about where it
Yep.
says it'll be taught by highly qualified, certified teachers?
Yeah,
And they aim to do a comprehensive that meets the state requirements? I don't think it's,
wait, Carlin, I might be looking at the wrong document. I look at
Yeah, I
this
have that under
19,
2B. But
18.
actually, I had the same reaction to 2B also. To a highly qualified specialist, it seemed like kind of a broad term, and I wasn't sure what that meant.
But aren't all our physical education instructors certified?
Well, they have to be by law. So we're required to have certified and highly qualified teachers in front of our students. I guess what I'm wondering is about the purpose of things going into policy and stating like the professional development they'll take. Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
Colin, tell us what the.
I think the idea,
what are we-
I think it was originally in there and we didn't, that was it did say that they'll be taught by, the original policy said it would be taught by certified teachers. I just changed it to like the wellness education, which
Mm.
includes physical education, because we changed our name. And then also, I think the idea was to avoid, just throwing anyone in the gym or in the physical education space, like any person who, needs to roll out their FT, fill out their FTEs. I think the idea was like, keep people who are certified in the subject area teaching the subject. And especially health education, right? And I think that was part of the reason why it's there.
So I think, Carlin, you're trying to solve a problem through the policy, and I don't know that that's, and I'm not a lawyer, so that's not, I don't know, but, so we've had some problems where we've had people assigned to teach wellness.
But that was already in there. I think
Yeah.
that was already there before in the last one, because it was just. You think it was, I can look at the original, but I believe that was already there. I just changed a little bit of the,
Well, I mean, I would completely support having
Fine,
someone who's qualified to teach health education, teaching health education though. That seems like something that belongs in policy if we're not currently doing that.
I would agree with you, Stephen.
So, I mean, if there's a problem that can be solved by putting in a policy, great. My only beef there, Carlin, was I thought the phrase highly qualified specialist just was open to a lot of interpretation. So I thought just having just taking out the phrase highly qualified.
I think originally it had said, DESE,
Sure.
right? So we could go back to doing that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, what is the date of the document that you are using? 6/18, 6/19/18?
Yeah. You're in it.
I am in it, okay.
I feel like you are.
I don't see anybody else in it, that's why.
Oh, I'm looking at a Word document.
It's the
Is anyone
same.
share a screen? Maybe would that be helpful?
You can share your screen, Stephen, if you.
I-
and we can
I don't think I can
or-
actually. Betsy, do you want to enable screen sharing? Oh, no, I can. I'll share it. Oh, no, I can't. I can't.
can hear you, Betsy.
Michelle, I do see that language under 1C and then also under 2B. So I think
Okay,
if you look a little back, you'll see it.
okay. Then I am in the right place.
What does everyone need from
Yeah.
me?
So given that Tricia Laham feels strongly about having a standalone physical education policy, and the current one was very short and didn't really say a whole lot.
Exactly.
What parts of the wellness section for physical education would we like to see folded into the standalone?
Do you want to do that work right now, or do you want me to propose it and send it to you?
It would be fine if you want to propose it and send to me, but also if subcommittee members have thoughts about what they think would be important to include.
And as we're talking about that, David, because I don't know if everyone on the wellness on this committee has seen the physical education policy, but in that physical education policy that we talked about on 216, there's a whole part of it that had to do with athletics that I'd want to have that separated out, right? Because physical education is not athletics. So when we do that editing work, I would want to, we need to move athletics someplace else.
Yes, I also see that there's a course requirements section in that currently has, well, it says 1 credit of physical education for grades 9 through 12, and then for K6 and 7 to 8, it's blank. Do we
Right,
feel that we
I-
fill that
I
in?
didn't- Yeah, I was gonna, are we gonna add in, the information that's in this wellness policy, like? And if
Or how
so,
do subcommittee members feel? It seems like there's a bit of pushback about being too specific.
I do think that number A, we should probably look at though, because especially in terms of the 10 through 12 with the BHS sports contract, if that's something that's going to be allowed in physical education going forward, shouldn't it also be in the physical education policy?
I would agree, yes. How do others feel?
Sorry.
Go ahead,
Yep,
Stephen.
sorry. Could you say that again, Carlin?
So currently at Brookline High School, you are required to take the 9th grade lifetime wellness class, which is right there. Every 9th grader is required to take that. Then in 10th through 12th grade, you can get your wellness credit in a couple different ways. You can get it by taking a wellness course, or you can get it through what's called a sports contract, which is getting it through playing a Brookline High School interscholastic sport. And then there's a third way that's not listed here that has to do with a thing called after school physical activity contracts, but those are very rare. And that's like, you know, only if a student has no access whatsoever to physical education and is participating in something that's not offered at Brookline High School. So I don't know if that specificity would need to go into the physical education policy. But that's what we are currently doing.
What do you think, Michelle?
So I do understand Trisha's thing, and I'm reading through this and I'm like, I'm getting in the weeds in it. So I'm not 100% sure I have a good answer at this minute. I
Okay.
just need to keep rereading it.
Because at least to me, if we're going to have a policy, I want it to actually say something and serve a purpose. And the way
Yeah.
it is now, it doesn't really say much.
I guess
We're
that's,
talking about the physical education policy, David?
Yes, not what you've done. What you've done is great, and it's clearly quite detailed. I'm referring to the standalone that we were
Yeah.
looking at originally, where there's also been some work to that one around adding language about inclusion, but
Right.
there's still much less in the physical education policy than what we have right here within wellness.
Is there a way, David, you could project that just for the committee so they can
Yes,
see
please.
what we're talking about? Because that was very helpful for me when I saw that. And I thought to myself, like, if it's going to live in both places, that's fine, but it should be the same in both places.
well, I think that's where I'm struggling. Like I've got both on my screen and
I don't think it needs to be the same in both places. I think this is the place where we're in the weeds and we go through what we think are good practices in physical education, but the wellness policy has a focus on physical education as wellness.
Right. So Stephen, I just forwarded it to you. For whatever reason, I can't pull up my PSB email from my computer, only from my phone.
Okay.
I can also send it to you, Stephen and Valerie.
The wellness policy, mean the standalone wellness policy?
Standalone physical
Physical
education
education.
policy.
Okay. I have to request access, apparently. Sorry about this. I also received a PDF of Section A wellness policy. Is that an edited version? I'm sorry to be so confused.
no, I'm confused too. Feel better about it.
Stephen, I apologize. I'm trying to send it to you by email.
Okay.
I think I
thought-
understand now. David, what you were saying is you're right. The biggest piece that stands out to me in this of the importance is the inclusive language. And I just wonder, like, the course requirements are set by the state. So in that first section, yeah, I guess I don't see a lot of meat to this to be, sitting there.
there's really nothing about physical education except the first paragraph. The rest is
Yeah.
athletics. So if we're gonna have this be a quote, physical education standalone policy, then, I mean, then I think we have to remove the athletics portion and make sure that the physical education policy is more, has more of the details from the section 3 of the wellness. Right? Or not?
I would think so, yes.
Or does an athletics policy stand alone with a clause about using that fulfilling the 9 through 12 physical education requirements set by the state?
I'm sorry to be so confused. In section A of the wellness policy, section 3.1, physical education, is that what we're replacing with the first part of this discussion? Or is that what we're now talking about? I received a document that was section A wellness policy. It starts with the public schools of Brookline will provide a range of physical activity opportunities to all students, etc. And then there's physical education, there's points A, B, and C, and that's it.
That's probably the previous version, and the Word documents would reflect the edits that have been made to it.
I
Yes,
see.
that's
I
what I
see.
think you're looking at, Stephen. I think you're looking at the,
The
because,
old version.
yes,
And so our initial discussion was to replace that version.
I think the initial discussion is to figure out if if we want to edit this section of the
I
wellness.
see.
But we also discovered, because it said physical education policy, and we have a separate physical education policy, which David and I worked on 216, and that's this one. But we haven't taken athletics out of it, and I haven't integrated the portion of the section 3 of the wellness policy into this, because I didn't know that was what we were doing. So I made a lot of comments on it. Just, David, I made a bunch of comments today just so people could, maybe that's where we should stop. Maybe people should take a look at, I just shared it with the rest of the committee. We could take a look at it and decide if we want to just make the edits on this phys ed policy, David?
Yes, we could do that.
Okay. And what do you think about taking the athletics part out of here? Because it's not.
Well, athletics is where we have the inclusion language. And that was actually the impetus for looking at physical education more broadly, even though I understand that they are separate. So maybe athletics should not be forced into the same section as physical education in the standalone policy, but I do think it's
Right,
worth
because we
having
don't,
that somewhere.
because in the physical education environment, we don't do any, separation.
All right, then I think athletics should be a separate policy, but I think we want to have that as a policy.
Mhm.
I agree with you. I mean, because we don't. I agree with you.
It's currently mixed together, but we want to decouple it, but I think that we still want to maintain them.
Oh, absolutely. I want to maintain the inclusion piece of what you're saying. I just think they be decoupled.
I'm sorry, I'm lost.
Mhm.
And David, can you give
So
us
what we have right
where we're at?
now in the screen share
Mhm.
is the physical education standalone policy, not wellness, just the physical education standalone policy.
And
Now the
what's the
current,
proposed purpose of the standalone policy?
so initially it was to add language around inclusion because we were having that situation with our cross-country team. And while we were in that process, it was pointed out that physical education and athletics should actually be treated separately. Athletics is referring more to what occurs after school. Physical education is a content area that's occurring during the school day. And so then that led us into this sort of, to go in this other direction of, well, should physical education be edited within the wellness policy? Should physical education and athletics be separated from the standalone policy that's currently physical education? And so that's what
Right.
we're discussing now, that we
I see.
added the inclusion language to athletics, but that athletics really shouldn't be in that physical education policy anyway.
I see. So what if we kept, I see, I understand now. So what if we do as you're proposing, keep this detailed version right here, but in a standalone policy, just simply add one sentence that emphasizes inclusion to both physical education and athletics separately, just stating the commitment of PSB to inclusion in physical education and athletics.
Sure.
So just to scroll to the top. Val, how would you phrase that commitment to inclusion in physical education?
But we
Sorry,
are,
because you're eloquent on this topic.
Sometimes I am. I'm just trying to look at where David edited it. Did you edit it in this section, David, or just in the other?
do you know what I think?
Just in the athletics.
Sorry, Carlin, so are you. I just, I didn't mean
No,
to.
it's fine. When we were at, if you look at the stuff that David passed out, it said like girls co-ed gym,
Oh, yeah.
equal time, like it was old. So we took that out.
Right.
Yeah, it was like Title IX based.
Yeah,
essentially.
we don't have girls gym. We have physical education for all students. Nothing is based on anything, gender, race, anything. So we already are fully included in physical education.
But
Do
this,
we have to put somewhere though? I thought when we were talking about this last, Carlin, we were talking about like changing rooms and stuff like that, was my recollection on the PE piece. Was that it was about like people using changing rooms that matched their gender identity or where they felt most comfortable.
I think that, well, with
I think
COVID,
we discussed, right, that there wasn't, you couldn't anyway, I don't think, come up with anywhere where we,
would deny anyone the
or we,
right.
where we did not, where we differentiate activity and PE based on gender.
Correct.
But I think what we did talk about was that changing rooms might be an issue, right? And so that we wanted
Right.
both in the wellness policy or the phys ed policy, wherever we're going to put it, and then also in the gender identity policy that we'd have in a couple places that their student could use the facility that matched their gender identity.
I think that's a great idea, Valerie. I'm glad you pointed it out. I mean, currently, especially with COVID, we just, so many locker rooms are not used anymore for physical education. Students often just come in the, they come in the clothes and that they're going to participate in. But I think we could have a one-liner that says, any student that needs to prepare for their class, just like any other class, should be able to do it in a safe and inclusive way. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
That's good.
So it should also be about students with disabilities, as well as open to ensure that students of any gender identity can fully participate in a manner in which they feel comfortable. So I just don't have the language.
It could be similar to this language looking at now for 1 and 2,
Yeah.
but applying it to physical education.
Can I ask at number 2 right there? Because this was under athletics. Why does it say where there are gender separated classes? We don't have any gender segregated classes.
Well, for athletics, we would. There are boys
Okay.
teams, there are girls teams.
Right, but I would take off gender segregated classes because we don't have that. You could say gender
these activities.
Okay.
activities, athletic activities, but we don't have any gender segregated classes. So there's a good edit. I was helpful for one thing.
No, you've been very helpful. Thank you for everything you're doing.
So then if this is actually, there looks like there's a section. So even though if you scroll up a little bit, David, right? See how it says athletics right here? But then in this, so it says athletics, right? And then it says school-based athletic experience. And then it goes on. And if you scroll down, it says physical education again. So I think that might be language left over. So inclusion means that all students, regardless of ability, challenge, or identity, have the right to be respected and appreciated as valuable members of the school community and fully participate in physical education programming. You could take that sentence and put it up in our phys ed policy,
Yes, I think that's good.
don't you think? And then you could just repeat it in your athletics policy, but just take out the physical education programming, and put athletic, right?
Yes, I think that works.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, wouldn't that be the same with the inclusion statement? Going into the wellness part, the physical education of the wellness policy, if this becomes a separate athletic policy?
We want it the same, don't we? In
Yeah.
athletics? Okay,
But again, the physical education comes in there.
yeah, so just take physical education out and
Mhm.
change that to athletics. And then we can copy that sentence and put up top. I can also play around with this and edit it unless you want to, we can just edit it right now if you want to, but. Valerie, am I missing anything from our meeting? I can't remember. I feel like I'm really glad you reminded me.
No, I think that that's right.
Yes, I think after this edit, we will have made good progress on this today. We do have several other agenda items to get to, and then we can give another look and put this back on the docket for our June meeting.
I think that's a great idea. And in between then and now and then I can, who should I work with just to make sure it's with you, David, maybe just to make sure if we kind of merge and make sure the policies are cohesive in both places?
Yes, I think that'd be good.
Can I
Okay.
ask just a generalized question in terms of policies in general? Because I still have a few questions on the changes to the physical education policy that on the other thing is, if we state specific things in a policy that we expect people to do, then those are things that we should be able to hold them to. And so if there are things in those policies that we actually can't hold them to based on the way our contract is written, then that might be language we want to look at. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. We may end up changing the contract if if it's important enough, we can bargain the impacts on the contract.
Okay, so can I just send the questions I have to you guys, the specifics?
Yeah. I think in general that we don't tend to do things that are outside the contract, but if there's a really overwhelming policy need, then we can always bargain the impacts on the contract.
Well, right, but I worry about like not doing it for all content areas at the same time as opposed to one, because I think they all have the same need.
I think, Michelle, if you feel like the language, if OTL feels like the language around qualifications for teachers or time on learning isn't some extremely reachable goal, then you should flag it for us.
Okay,
You
that's
should consider
right.
putting it in there.
Yep.
If it feels like at all a stretch, then we should really reconsider whether it belongs in the policy right now.
right.
For me, especially time on learning, because to me that should come from like an overall OTL master plan. So
Mhm.
if this just feels like an extremely reachable goal, like 40 minutes twice a week, of course we can do that, then it stays in. If you're looking at it and it's like, we could probably do that, then I think it shouldn't be in there right now. That's my feeling.
Well, like, I mean, I know we've been doing it, Stephen, for at least the 8 years that my kids have been in PSB. So like the
Yeah,
question I
no,
think, the
it's-
thing is like,
20
how many,
I have
am-
27
I'm
years that I've
thinking-
been here, Valerie.
I'm
27?
thinking more of the impact that it becomes. I come back to, we do this with wellness, we put some things in here in a policy, and then you'll have other departments coming and saying, we want it in a policy, and there's no reason if we put it in wellness not to put it in those.
That's
And then all of a
okay.
sudden,
But
we
that's
have-
okay. I mean, like, unless you oppose, unless you don't think PE should have that time.
no, I totally do. And this is what I'm trying to understand. So it's just, no, I do think, I actually would have put
Well,
40.
technically, we
but-
should have 60 minutes a day according to the national standards, but I'll take the 2 days a week for 40 minutes as what we've been doing for.
If
And
I'm
then-
saying what kind of time I think we should have, it should be a 45-minute block, but that's so, I actually would have gone for more.
I mean, I think the more we start putting time on learning and policy, the better.
I
Great.
agree. And also, I'm not super concerned about this being a precedent setter for academic subjects or academic departments to then come in, academic in the sense of social studies, language arts, et cetera, because I do see physical education a bit differently than those. And I think most people probably would. And it sounds like it's physical education classes have been 40 minutes twice a week for decades now.
Yeah, I feel
That's
that way,
at the
David,
K.
about the three that are required by law, right? So PE, English, and history. Like I feel that way about that we could do that for all those three because those are at least the state mandated classes. And then, if we,
Well, math too.
but is it actually, is there actually a mandate on math
Mhm.
up and through what grade?
Math is K-12. Is a requirement. Mhm. Math, science, the four main requirements aside from this.
Yeah, this is a post MCAS world. I'm going back to my own.
Yeah, the
Those are
requirements by
different.
state are physical education, ELA, math, science, and social studies. Like those are K-12.
But to graduate the high school, isn't English the only class that you need 4 years of?
No,
I
well,
thought so.
Yes.
Mass Core states that you need 4 years of math, but we have the ability to write our own graduation requirements. So we only have 3.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Well,
thank
let
you.
all of
That's
you-
clarifying for me. That's clarifying. I appreciate the time.
Okay.
Great.
Right, so thank you very much, Carlin. This was extremely helpful and
Oh,
we'll be in
thank
touch.
you. Thank you for the good work that y'all are doing and in supporting the students and families in Brookline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, so that leads us now to discussion of transgender rights policy. And Val sent me some very useful information regarding where that currently stands for non-binary policy at DESE, and that perhaps we might want to mirror what they're doing. Would like to talk more about that, Val?
Sure. So in terms of current policy, I've worked with them back years, and what they put forth, I think it was 2021, as the state guidance on transgender issues or gender identity issues is now up on the DESE website. It's DOE required of all districts. So my thought was that, and the other piece of that is that they are working on updating that to include more relevant policy for non-binary and gender fluid students. So my thought was that we adopt what the state has as policy now, and some of its guidelines. So maybe I guess I could see it going 2 ways. We just either cut and paste the whole thing and put that as policy as opposed to a combination of policy and guidance, or we just adopt what the state has as our policy. And then I've been in communication a little bit with the Safe Schools folks to see if they would be willing to share a draft of the updated policy before they go before Department of Ed so that we could perhaps adopt that before they present it to DESE. So I'm waiting to hear back from them on that. So I guess I just don't want us to have to reinvent the wheel because the state now has pretty comprehensive, outdated a bit, but comprehensive policy that we're required to follow anyway.
Okay.
There are some guidance pieces, David, that I thought maybe, again, we could either cut and paste the whole thing and make it policy here as opposed to just guidance. But that link that I sent earlier is the link to all of it, and it has examples and all that sort of thing baked into it.
I'll pull it up, Val, if you want.
Who do you recommend, Valerie?
So
What did you do?
I would recommend cutting and pasting essentially the whole thing. And then, you know, if we want to take out the examples or annotate the examples, I think we can do that. But again, like, I think that the language is great. They worked on it a ton. So I don't think we need to sort of wordsmith this. It's very well done.
What's the sorry, what's the value of copying and pasting a state policy into our own? Rather than just saying we will
So
abide by state policy?
So if you go down, it's if you scroll down, right, like they talk about the law. I believe this
Yeah.
part of this isn't.
For me, at least, I think it can be helpful if those in the PSB community can open the policy handbook and see answers to their
Read it.
questions.
Yeah,
Even just having it as it becomes a reference tool, as opposed to a line that simply references a law and then they have to go looking somewhere else and they might just say, forget it.
Yeah.
Also, we can always make our policies more stringent if we so choose. So this sort of sets a floor, but we can make some of the guidelines requirements if that's something that we would want to do. So there can be some areas where we may want to diverge, where what is suggested by DESE is something that we want to
right,
mandate.
so can you go back a little bit, just first, department strongly recommends districts include an appropriate number of gender neutral restrooms, right?
Mm.
So we could actually say something different. That's an example of a place, I think, David, where we could say in all new construction, in all new PSB construction, or, you know, whatever, however we want to phrase it, that there shall be whatever number, then we, you know, a gender inclusive bathroom in every suite of student facing bathrooms or whatever, however we want to do that. But Betsy was just scrolling, and that was one example where I thought was a place that we could be, go beyond it being strongly recommended.
Oh, this is really thorough.
Yeah.
I see. So thanks for having us not reinvent the wheel.
Is there anything from your original 2019 draft, Val, that you think would be particularly useful to include here?
This incorporates it all, and I looked at this against my 2018-19 draft, and this incorporates all of it and adds actually to later cases and policies that came in after 2019. So it's more up to date.
Okay. How about you, Stephen? Anything else that you would like to see included?
I haven't read this in detail, but I haven't read this in detail. I'd like to read it, but I also trust Val's recommendation. And I like your idea, David, that our policy is a useful reference guide. So pasting a strong DESE policy into our own is useful.
All right, then I guess that's what we'll do. And this can be something else that we include in our June docket. And Val, the additional information you were referring to, you think will be ready by when?
So unclear when they're gonna have it for DOE. I'm just trying to see if they can actually help with something sooner. It's being worked on by Safe Schools, so the statewide program, and also GLAD. Some of the lawyers at GLAD are working on it as well, Chris Urchel in particular. So if I don't hear back soon from Safe Schools, I'll call Chris. I know Chris pretty well at GLAD, so I'll call him.
Okay.
So apologies, Betsy, I didn't reply about this policy and I should have, and somebody did a lot of work on editing something and I feel badly. David, I think that was you.
No, it's fine. Thank you. All right, so why don't we move on to the next item then, which is a sort of a joint discussion of 3 different policies, which are student safety and well-being, school safety and security policy, accident prevention, and emergency plans policy. And the reason that I think we should be looking at these 3, we've had several incidents this year, particularly at the high school, where parents and other caregivers have raised some concerns about safety of the building, safety of the community. And I'm wondering whether we think our current policies are sufficient enough for how we want to approach these issues that seem to continue to crop up. This is also going to relate to our next discussion item about a communications policy, but why don't we start first regarding the student safety, well-being, security.
Sorry, are you asking about the communications around this or about the?
I'm just saying the communications piece that we're going to discuss right after this is related in the sense that there have been a lot of concerns about how we communicate to the broader community at PSB when there are incidents of this nature regarding a threat to other students or to the community at large. But for now, why don't we start on the safety components of it? So these 3 different safety related policies. If you've had a chance to review them, what do you feel is lacking? What should be added?
Oh, 3, okay. I have all 3. I'll start. So it was hard for me to evaluate these as policies because I don't have a sense of what the problem is, David, because I don't have a sense of the what the incidents have been and what the responses have been, because for legal reasons we don't have a lot of transparency into some of this. So I don't know to what extent these policies really cover the scenarios that have taken place. So I think to answer the question of do the policies cover the events, we would have to have an in-depth conversation with the administration to get a better sense of what the problem is. That's where I start. I was reading through it and it was difficult for me to map it on because it feels like a blank space. Oh, hey, Natalia, sorry.
Hi, sorry to join.
Welcome.
Welcome. You can put your camera on and talk.
Yeah,
We're
welcome.
very open. We welcome everybody at all of our committee meetings.
Okay, great. I'm here just listening in and learning, but I probably go off camera so that I can just listen in more, if that's okay with you.
Very exciting.
So right now, Natalia, we are talking about the student safety and well-being, school security policies. And we are looking at this in the context of, there have been some recent events at the high school in particular regarding student safety, and we want to see whether our current policies are sufficient in terms of being able to handle these challenges when they arise. And Stephen was just commenting that for legal reasons, primarily, we as school committee members may not necessarily have all the details that we need in order to properly assess these policies as written and whether they would be addressing the challenges that we are currently confronting.
I don't know, what are your takes? I have a lot more to say on the communications aspect, but did you have more specific things to say about the policies as they cover the events?
Well, so for the accidents and drills policy, for instance, there's a section about fire drills, even about bomb drills.
Yeah.
But do we want to have something for active shooter? Do we want to have that as a drill? Are there other types of drills that we might want to add to the policy? And how would we go about doing that?
So, on this one, David, I have a question that I'm not sure we can answer. Probably need somebody from admin to answer, which is, I thought that Alice drills were required every year, but I haven't heard of them happening recently. I don't know. Betsy might actually know the answer.
I don't, I'm sorry.
Like I remember them happening kindergarten, first, second grade for my kids, and then I haven't heard about one in the last 5 years. But Natalia has her hand up, so maybe she knows.
No,
Yes,
I
go
don't know
ahead,
if they're
Mary.
happening, but I was gonna say, the evidence does not show that they help. At least the public health evidence suggests that they're not helpful and they can actually be harmful too. So unless we think that there's a real risk, I mean, I would go back to look at it, but when I had looked at it once, is that the active shooter drills are just not.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Like they definitely cause some trauma in and of themselves. I just wasn't
Exactly.
sure
And
if we're required to do them or not.
yeah, I haven't heard of my kids doing them. I don't know, Stephen, if you have. So I think, whereas I have heard of fire drills, so I assume they're just not happening.
Natalia, are there any types of safety drills that you think are helpful that we're not currently doing? So beyond fire drills?
I don't actually know what we are doing, so I know, I mean, maybe I shouldn't admit to it. But I mean,
Well, at least from the policy, we have fire drills and bomb scare drills, bomb threats.
yeah, I mean, I guess earthquakes are not an issue here, right? So we don't need those. I mean, I don't even know what a bomb scare one would be. Is it different from a fire drill in terms of what you do? I don't know. I don't know enough, but I do know that the I mean, in the gun violence, public health literature and community, there is quite a strong feeling that those don't help and they can be pretty traumatic to kids. But I can try and think if there's anything else. I mean, you know, okay, Leo, sorry, I am home with the kids.
What about for staff? Is there a benefit to staff having active shooter drills?
I don't know. That's a good question for staff to know what to do, like how to like barricade a room or something like that. That might, yeah. I mean, we got them at the UN as like staff members, and there were different procedures for different things. So that might be, I can look into the literature. I could even ask David Hemingway, who used to be at ACPH, but no longer is, but is kind of like the world's best gun violence prevention person that I know. And he's a Brooklyn resident. And I can ask him what he knows about that. But for staff or for, yeah, whether to lock down a school or, you know, for like, I can imagine that staff should have, plans and maybe drills help put that in. Like, do you lock down a section? Do you not? Do you leave? You know, anyways, I hope it's a little disturbing even thinking about it, but yeah.
All right, and then the
David.
other, go ahead, Stephen.
I was also going to ask, so in safety and wellness, do we consider a category for hate speech and hate actions or and iconography?
I think we could certainly add that. I know you've been asking to have that added for a while, and this might be
Yeah.
a good time to add that and the right place to incorporate it. That does seem to be the majority of
proposed it, when I was proposing it initially, I think I was proposing it a lot more innocently, because and since I started proposing it, I started looking for examples, and I started finding very few examples of such policies, I think, owing to the difficulty of finding strong language on it. So I think I'm a little bit more sanguine about how difficult it is to create a strong policy like that now. But I still think I start first with an interest in communication around this so that it can be standard, but I still would like to see some policy to have some consistency around how we behave around such incidents, aside from just the communication out on it.
Yes. So in the student safety and well-being policy, that one is essentially only addressing corporal punishments and that it's not going to be allowed. And that policy hasn't been touched since 1983.
Right.
There might be a place where we want to add some other sections about student safety and well-being, because that's a very broad topic to only be addressing corporal punishment. And that could be a place where there could be a section on hate speech and iconography, because that certainly impacts student safety and well-being. A majority of the incidents that we've been hearing about this year were actually more in that category of hate speech and iconography.
I mean, when I looked at this, David, like the whole thing sort of needs to be redone, right? I mean, just because we don't even have people in these, none of the positions even match. Like having the deputy super, or in this case, assistant superintendent for ANF, to have oversight of the system-wide safety procedures seems odd to me. I mean, I know they're talking
Right.
about some of the
Right.
physical space stuff, but it also seems to encompass other pieces of it in a plain read of it. Like it's not OSS, it's very strange.
I agree. So this certainly needs to be revised quite a bit. What are some other categories that we think belong in student safety and well-being? So obviously, we don't want corporal punishment. I think that stays, but what should be added? I like Stephen's idea of hate speech and iconography.
I mean, don't we want to say anything about verbal abuse? I mean, verbal abuse harassment too?
Yes, I mean, we do have a policy on that, but I think it's important to mention here. And it can be cross-listed.
Perhaps we can, I was going to say, perhaps we can cross-reference or link
Yeah.
it there, but I just think mentioning it, if we're going to mention corporal punishment, since corporal punishment is also a state crime. so,
Yes.
Not off the books in some states.
but here it is.
Yeah, here it is.
Here it's assault and battery.
And student safety patrols were done away with in 1970.
Integrated student services. I guess that means OS. I'm not sure what that means.
That's some kind of vigilante thing. ES2A, EE2A.
That's what it sounds like.
Patrols, yeah, voted 1970, before I was born.
What's going on?
Vietnam? I mean, I don't know.
Hmm.
The interest of safety students, Brookline disapproves of the concept of student safety patrols.
Before Helen.
Protests of some sort? I mean, it was 1970. There were lots of things going
You know,
on.
I wonder if this is an opportunity, David, to convene building leaders for a conversation, because there's disparate policies on this, and this is one of those places where there's going to be a really blurry line between policy and process, and we should just be careful on this. But it's such an opportunity for us to say something concrete at the same time.
Right.
I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to have a robust discussion with building leaders about what the current state of school level process is in this area, and where they see opportunity for higher level guidance, and what advice they would give us on where there are current gaps.
Yes. That's sort of the other category that's not explicitly addressed here or in the other two. Building security. Do we like that our schools are essentially locked for the most part, not the high school, of course, but most of the other buildings? Do we want to go back to having the open building concept where parents and caregivers can come in? That's a discussion that keeps cropping up. I'm not sure it necessarily fits here, but it does speak more broadly to potential security issues.
Right. I'm not sure if it's in this conversation. Well, I guess if we open up I mean, I strongly think we should be opening up the buildings. So maybe it should be referenced how, if the buildings are open, what student safety measures would be taken to ensure that I mean, I think that open buildings are safer because it promotes community ownership of the buildings.
Yes.
But are we gonna, where did we leave that though, in terms of, right at our session?
So at our,
Was it-
at our
was it-
workshop, I thought it sounded pretty unanimous to me that we all wanted buildings to be open within reason, of course, to not interfere with the school day and with instruction.
Right, but
And
I don't
that's-
recall that we said we'd do a policy, right? Weren't we just gonna have Linus talk to building leaders?
I think
Yeah.
so.
The other security related issue that crops up is surveillance. Do we want to have cameras up? Do we not want them? If we do want them, where would we want them? I'm sensing just from feedback that I receive that there's significant frustration that we don't have them at the high school.
Interesting.
Because a lot of the incidents this year, we were not able to identify the perpetrators. And so that sort of instills ongoing fear and concern among other students. So for instance, the pepper spray incident, my understanding is the perpetrator was never identified. There are many who seem to think they know who the perpetrator was, but there was no hard evidence. And that's been a repeating phenomenon.
I guess I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this, which is unless you have cameras everywhere, students are gonna figure out where the cameras are and where they aren't. And also, I don't know, I mean, we've talked about this before, like cameras can go in a very difficult way, right? And we could be policing lots of behaviors that we don't necessarily want to police. Just throwing it out there. I agree, it maybe could have figured out who did the pepper spray, but on the other hand, is it going to be used to prosecute every student who, I don't know, has marijuana once at the high school or something, or I'm not, I don't know.
Right, I'm not necessarily advocating for it, just saying it is a security related topic that could fall in to these policies and whether we want to take a position on that. Sounds like right now, maybe we don't have to, but this is an opportunity to do so if we so choose.
Yeah, right now I'm not sure what problem it would be solving. Is there, I'm not sure, is there an outbreak of security incidents that require additional surveillance? Because surveillance obviously comes with the downside.
So
Right, I mean,
think-
David was mentioning the pepper spray, which was a real one.
Yeah, but I mean, I would think an outbreak of incidents would require a change, not standalone ones.
So hopefully when we have the, at our last school committee meeting, there's going to be a review of disciplinary matters from the school year and hopefully a comparison as to whether there's an increase this year compared to previous years. So that we'll be in a better position to judge whether there is indeed an increase or if it's at approximately the same level it's always been. Because sometimes it can be hard to know whether it's just that we're hearing more about incidents or whether there's a true increase.
So that actually goes back to one of the various policies that we've discussed over the last couple months, which is, and I'm working on this one for DEIJ, which is how are those reported currently, right? Because I don't think that we have a great repository to be able to look at apples to apples on some of those things. And there are different things. So the ones for DIJ are hate related, but I think what you're talking about, David, is broader in terms of like safety and all of the incidents, right? And by category.
Yes.
And do
David?
we get do we get consistent data, I guess, year over year to be able to make apples to apples comparisons?
David, I wonder if if one of us could reach out to the BHS PTO prior to that meeting and ask for some of them to make a public comment about their impressions of public safety at BHS, because I think it would be helpful to get engaged parents' impressions, not just motivated parents, because I think they would probably be on the pro surveillance side, but rather parents who are just very engaged at BHS.
Yes. All right, so.
All right,
yes,
David, could you speak to that though? What I'd asked, do we get apples to apples data year over year in your experience on school committee?
Not so far. I think that we're finally starting to standardize these reporting mechanisms, and we'll see if this year's data matches last year's. We are going to be having this docketed for our last meeting of the year. We're going to have a presentation on pretty much every policy that has a reporting requirement. We're going to get that data the June meeting, and I think we'll be in a better position at that meeting or a little bit before, when we have an opportunity to review the slide presentation, if that's the format it takes, to see how it compares to what we were provided in years past.
Okay.
I certainly agree with you that we want to be able to have those fair comparisons so that we actually know what we're dealing with and not have the variables change every year.
Okay.
All right, so why don't we move on now to PSB communications policy? And Stephen, you said you had a lot to say on this, so go right ahead.
Hang on. Well, wait, it's not in response to anything though. Was there, is it, you mean to section?
This is what we talked about. We talked about at the at our workshop, and then we also talked about a DEIJ, right, on how to communicate out events,
Yes,
hate
this is
events, and other
discussion.
events. Yeah.
There's no particular draft to look at. We do have a policy in terms of school committee communications to the PSB community, but this is specific to PSB's communications, not school committee. So this is just a discussion to figure out what we would like to include in such a policy, and then we'll draft one. So have either of you seen models of a communication policy for any type of organization, even if it's a business entity?
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah,
what are
but
the
not about things like this though, right? Like this is different from business, for me anyway, it's different from business policies I've seen when you're talking about reporting out. I guess the analog is to a shareholder as opposed to, you know, what you're talking about internally, but I think it's different when you're talking about hate speech or pepper spray or something where people's kids are involved. Like the level of what they want to know is different and higher, different qualitatively and also quantitatively.
So I think let's start with this. It seems to me that there is a problem here, which is there's a great deal of community unhappiness around not the incidents themselves, but what feel like a lot of confusion or opacity around how the district communicates after such an incident. I think some of that has to do with the fact that, you know, we're legally restrained from communicating a lot of the details of that. And a lot of people don't understand what those constraints are, but we don't even communicate that there are constraints, which I think doesn't help people better understand that the fact that there are those constraints. But it doesn't seem like there is much of an effort to address the fact that there is this widespread confusion and frustration in the community after the pepper spray incident, or after many of the hate speech or iconography incidents. It seems like there are brief, mostly substanceless communications, and then there's a lack of follow-up.
So I thought not talking about I'm talking about the most recent now, the BB gun, and I actually thought that the police did a pretty good job in their press release of getting the information out that they could get out, right? Both legally and just factually in the time frame. But I still don't think people were satisfied, right? And even if they were satisfied with the level of information based on social media, there's a whole crew of people who wanted the student expelled forever and ever, and without knowing any more detail. And so I agree with you, Stephen, that there's an issue with perceived lack of information. I'm not sure it's lack of information, but I don't know I guess I don't know what the solution is. Do we educate people on FERPA? Well, I'm not sure what the response is,
I
right?
see.
And it's slightly different in each case, because sometimes it's that there's a victim you don't want to identify who doesn't want it, or who themselves doesn't want to be identified. Sometimes it's that the perpetrator of something is facing criminal charges, and you don't want to do anything that messes with their presumption of innocence. I mean, so it's sort of different in each scenario. And I'm not sure how a school building leader could necessarily address that, and then how we in a policy would speak to that.
So I like your idea.
I'd love to hear thoughts if you have them, but I just, I'm
Right.
not.
So I agree with you that part of it is just frustration that someone's idea of discipline or lack of discipline is not being met. And I'm not proposing that we make changes in that direction, because I don't think it's our place, and I don't think we're going to satisfy any constituency that way without equally upsetting another constituency. But I do think there is more we could do with communications. Like, what if, can I just think out loud for a minute? What if we used the PSB website, for instance, and posted the official communication to the website, and then we linked to the relevant building policy, and we also linked to the relevant legal restrictions preventing us from further communications, so that there were references that inquiring parents could click on to better understand what the process is for going through any discipline or rehabilitation, and they could better understand why the communication is as limited as it is, something like that. But it doesn't go out per email, but they could just do it via links or something like that.
So I like the idea in terms of providing links to the legal resources, as well as to restorative justice techniques and sort of other ways of handling disciplinary issues that don't go straight to expulsion, as some people would like to see.
That are specific to the issue. So if the building policy says, like, this is the policy that we're now following,
Yes.
just so that parents are assured that there is something governing a building's response to an incident.
Yes, I agree with that part. I'm not sure, though, that we would want to show the building policy itself. And the reason I say that is I just worry about potentially opening ourselves up to litigation, and some of it probably frivolous, because ultimately it's really state law that governs, not even these policies. It would be nice if people follow policies, but the penalty is not necessarily anything particularly meaningful, depending on what the policy is. And I wouldn't want parents and caregivers to be able to say, oh, look, our principal didn't follow section 2A3 in this particular instance. And maybe they really did follow it, and it's just interpretation of it, although maybe they didn't, but it just sort of could open up a can of worms. But I do like the idea of more broadly, depending on the category of incidents, saying due to FERPA, we can only disclose the following. In these types of situations, we look toward restorative justice or whatever the path might be.
That seems doable to me, David.
I see.
I think it also allows for us to be more nimble, right? Because another criticism on the communication is that it doesn't happen quickly. And I think if we were having somebody have to get it to like Mike Chan to put up on the website, to translate, to figure out what they were linking to, that we would lose being able to get at least something out quickly. Maybe not. Maybe you're talking about a sort of longer statement after incident report. That's not that initial communication.
If we're talking about the initial one, it seems to me that there could be boilerplate language around FERPA at minimum. That's pretty much always going to apply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just adding boilerplate language around FERPA doesn't seem sufficient. I mean, it does seem it will help some people who find everything needlessly opaque, but it doesn't help. I'm not sure why we can't provide further. I understand what you're saying, David.
Well, I think we can, Stephen. I'm not suggesting that we would stop at the FERPA boilerplate. I see that as a start. So at minimum, we include that. Depending, we could have separate categories of types of incidents. So there's where someone's physical security is at risk, and the type of answer that would go there would be FERPA plus the disciplinary process. And then if it's a iconography incident, how we would typically discipline in that scenario, plus the FERPA language. So I think we can have maybe 5 or however many categories there are that are sort of ready to go. And then you just sort of apply the specific facts in a manner similar to what the police did with the BB gun.
So
Yeah.
Is that a policy though, David, or is that more of the implementation piece? Right? Are we drafting that to help out building leaders more than? Go ahead, sorry.
You might want it to be a policy because there's been some inconsistency in terms of what gets communicated when and how. And obviously we don't want to hamstring building leaders that they have to respond in the exact same way. But I do think it might be helpful for the community to know that there's going to be a minimum guarantee of some kind of communication. They're going to receive something at some point, depending on what it is. Whereas right now, when it's just left up to the complete individual discretion of building leaders and community members see inconsistencies in how things get reported, I think that's where we run into a little bit of a problem.
Right.
So
I just mean, are we gonna write into that, right? Like you're sort of giving frameworks of 4 or 5 different types. Like when I think about that as us giving tools to building leaders, but that what's written in the policy is something like you shall communicate within X number of hours, within the bounds of FERPA and all of the relevant laws, right? But that what you were just describing would be a tool that we provided to building leaders. Maybe I misunderstood you, but
No, you're right. That would be more of procedures that they would develop in order to implement the policy. The policy would be more about you will communicate such and such within this period of time, and it will not contravene FERPA. It will address the appropriate disciplinary track, whatever it might be that we come up with.
I don't think it would be bad for us to have, 4 boilerplates to share with building leaders. Boilerplate, FERPA says blah, 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 and
Yes.
just to help out building leaders who are trying to also.
Right, it could just be a template. Like, please describe the incident within the bounds of FERPA. Please express your sentiments as best you can about it here. And
I think within the bounds of FERPA and all applicable state and federal law, something that's catch-all.
Yes.
right, and please reference the policy that you're following or the the policy area that you're following to respond to the incident.
Okay. Anything else that should be included?
I think that would get us on a draft to look at and start with, but
Yeah, and then it could be the school committee's responsibility to just to point people to that document in response to community questions.
Okay. All right, so we can work more on that. And whose input do you think from staff we should specifically solicit? Linus certainly, but anyone else?
I think
Yes.
Hal and maybe at least 2 or 3 of the K-8 building
I
leaders.
agree with that. I think all building leaders should be invited.
Sorry,
to-
Anthony. Yeah, Anthony and 2 or 3 of the K-8 building leaders. Yeah, all can be invited, but
Yeah.
they might
Okay.
not all have time.
All right, so that brings
Maybe
us,
also Chief Pastor. I don't know if Chief Pastor wants to weigh in from a, or we just want to leave them to do their own press releases. I think that's fine too, just like on how we coordinate with them.
yes. I think that would be more of an informal conversation because I think we can anticipate what the police would bring up and I'd rather not turn a
Yeah,
discussion.
no, I agree. I mean, but I just think this last one, their report came out before anything from the schools came out, right? Like we were late to that one. And so their police report or their press release was out before the schools, I think, really had said anything about it.
Yes.
Can I ask a question about what type of things you would expect them to report on? Like at Pierce, Jamie like will report if a kid is taken away by an ambulance. Like sometimes I think it's too much information. Like, I mean, I guess she's doing it in case a kid asks, like, is it just for like incidents of hate or violence, or is it some when like the police is called to the school or an ambulance is called to the school, like to give them some guidance, especially if you're going to say within X numbers of hours, they would need to know what qualifies to, I mean, unless that already exists.
I don't think that the ambulance, like that might be like a Jamie thing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's a Jamie thing. I mean, I think it's a lot. I don't think I would ever require it of anybody, but I'm saying within that, like maybe some other principal would think that, you know, some, you know, hate speech in a bathroom. Like there was something the 4th grade boys had done. I mean, she gave us enough information to worry me and not enough to know what it was. Like it was kind of a, you know, it was, you know, 4th grade boys bathroom. I assume it was around, you know, gender and some sort of something or sexual something or other, but there wasn't any more information other than to inform us. So again, from a parent perspective, I wonder, like, when is the threshold of like, yes, information, like obviously the BB gun should have gone out, and when is it not necessary and may require a little bit more information, or I don't know. So sometimes, I mean, I think that should be clear if it is a policy that requires a response in a certain set number of hours.
I agree. We should establish what a threshold is in terms of a community-wide communication.
right, like
Like the pepper spray, the BB gun, those are very clear examples to me of where you need to issue communication. Natalia's example shows sort of in the other direction. So it's hard to sort of define what qualifies.
yeah, I mean, on Natalia's example, like I've been, as a parent, I've been communicated with if something happened around one of my kids where they might come home and talk about it, but it wasn't a community wide. It was just like, oh, Jake saw somebody in 1st grade, you know, Jake saw somebody have a seizure today. He might be nervous when he comes home and want to talk about it without identifying who the student
No,
is.
these are community-wide communications, and yeah, presumably not every kid saw it, because it'd be like some kid was taken out of the gym. You know, I think she's only doing it when several kids saw it. I don't think she would do it. There's probably other
Right,
cases.
so
But
I
the graffiti
think-
in the boys' bathroom, which wasn't like hate speech, but it was probably concerning. Like, should that have come to the parents? I don't know. It didn't give me any information, so I couldn't really have a conversation with my kid about it. So it was kind of like, okay, great. I don't know. So I'm wondering.
I mean, for the sake of the safety and wellness policy, for me, I think we're talking about rising to the level of hate speech, because that is something that clearly affects youth sense of safety. There's a lot of gray area clearly beyond hate speech that affects a child's sense of safety, but I don't think for now we need to go that deep into gray area. I think we just need to cover something that's clearly in the red, which is hate speech.
And also safety, also.
Sorry, that's right. You're right. Health, wellness, and safety. And I think we can continue to leave it up to building leaders to communicate out on what they feel affects their community. But we should have a policy that hate speech, which clearly impacts students' sense of wellness and safety, needs to be communicated in a somewhat standardized manner.
And so injury in your mind is not safety unless it's related to like the school building, like the stage collapsing or something like that. Like there was an incident where
Right.
there was a brick thrown into Pierce and the window broke and she communicated that. And, you know, I think that was helpful, but like injury in general, it's weird because the policy had like child health in there. So that's why under safety, but you're saying not
Right.
injury.
I recognize that there's a lot of gray, like for instance, like a child's death, for instance, could be deeply traumatizing to community and is clearly not hate speech and would be something that would clearly have to be communicated, but at the same time, I don't think needs to be prescribed in a policy about exactly how the building leader needs to handle it. Whereas I think hate speech has become, unfortunately, something sufficiently pervasive and confusing to the community so that a policy that standardizes our communication on the topic would be helpful to the community. And I'm trying to narrow it so that we are addressing something that's sufficiently specific. That's how I'm thinking about it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we would need to define the safety pieces that perhaps don't send multiple people to the hospital, but are sufficiently alarming in the community, like the BB gun and the pepper spray.
That's right. That's right.
Right,
That's
because
right.
even though they didn't send
That's right.
whatever,
You're
a
right,
couple
yeah.
dozen kids to the hospital, that it was sufficiently alarming, I think, to people. And
Right. So I guess that's beyond hate speech in a sense of danger in the community. So that's not the same as hate speech at all.
I just think it's both and.
Right, but you're making the point that I hadn't acknowledged, which is that it's actually not so narrow as hate speech, but something that's more broadly conceived as a danger to the community, which hate speech is a category within, but not exclusively defining, because BB gun and the weird air duct incident and like those are all that should be covered by this policy. So maybe we need to call it, I don't know, I'm thinking out loud and I'm not so quick right now.
Instance of public health and safety, I don't know.
Instance of perceived danger, and that's very open to interpretation, but that's okay with me. I mean, the building leaders we're expecting them to have good judgment and to make those determinations. Anyway, I'm happy to work on this with somebody if anyone would like to work on it with me.
All right, Stephen, so you want to take I'm happy to work on it with you, but it sounds like you want to work on a first draft. I'm going to work on first drafts for some of these other ones
Sure.
that we've discussed today. And then we can
We're
address
working
them.
with Natalia.
Okay. All right, so that brings us to update on sustainability panel.
Hey, so that went out. I'm sorry it took me 3 months, but it went out. I hope everyone will blast it to their networks. So the deadline for application, I believe, Betsy, was it June 2nd? I think it was June 2nd. So you're gonna give me a thumbs up if it's right. I think it's June 2nd.
Yeah, Friday, June 2nd, 5 p.m.
Okay, so we're calling for volunteers for 4 groups on the Climate Sustainability Task Force is what we're calling it. They correspond to the sustainability policy. There are 6 areas of the sustainability policy, but 6 groups seemed a little insane. So I just consolidated a little bit into the 4 groups. One is transportation, that's the 4th one. One is buildings and outdoor space for the recreational space. One is curriculum and education, and one is food and nutrition. Did I get it more or less right?
Food services and waste.
Food services and waste. So hopefully we'll get really strong applicants. I'm just hoping people will apply and be energetic about it. I have really high hopes for this. I'm asking everyone to blast out this call for volunteers to their networks.
You know yet if anyone's responded?
Betsy, have we
Yes.
got any?
Someone replied today. Yes. Yep.
Excellent.
I got the blast today from Mothers Out Front. So
Great.
it went out on the Mothers Out Front listserv. So I expect you'll get a lot of responses.
That's really great to hear.
Excellent. All right, so now we move on to new business. Is there any new business? All right, seeing none, then that concludes our meeting for today. So thank you everyone for joining.
Oh, actually, sorry, what's not new, David? Can I speak to something that's not new?
Sure.
Are you going to speak to the warrant articles that we are supporting at town meeting?
So usually we just issue statements,
Just
but
doing the
certainly and the statements have been submitted, and it was actually Betsy who drafted them. So thank you very much, Betsy, for doing that for us.
Thank you, Betsy.
So just borrowing language and pasting it together. So not much.
But I do plan to speak to the budget. So that's still very much in flux in terms of warrant Article 7. We don't know really where that's going to land, but certainly we're going to want to opine on it.
David, does the school committee ever submit its own amendments? Are we allowed to submit amendments to that budget, or is that just TMMs who submit it?
It's just town meeting members, but Val's a town meeting member. I'm a town meeting member. Nancy's a town meeting member. So we've got 3 people who could do it.
Natalie, are you still a town meeting member? Natalie is a town
Natalie
meeting
as
member.
well, that's right. So 4 of us.
Okay.
Although I don't think amendments to the budget from town meeting members are that welcome. I mean, I know Marissa did, but right? I mean, I've only been a town meeting member for 2 years.
I think this
so-
might be a special case this year.
Yeah.
So it
okay.
is rare.
Good
I've been on
idea.
town meetings since 2013, and I can only recall 1 instance ever where there was 2 actually, and it's in recent years. And once by Marissa, and I think once by Scott Ananian. And the one by Marissa passed narrowly. The one by Scott failed by a fairly wide margin. But we are seeing that there is more activism among town meeting members with the budget. I think that's probably good, especially given the hostility that advisory committee has toward public education.
And on that note, welcome, Natalia.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. And sorry to
welcome.
come late and just jump in, but I'm going to try and listen into some of these. I hope that's okay, David. I've gotten
Yes, no,
that.
absolutely. You should be, the more the merrier in terms of the subcommittees that you attend. You're welcome at everything. All members sometimes will attend subcommittee meetings for which they're not officially members. Finance is a particularly
Yeah.
popular one for people to attend. Oftentimes 7 of the 9 of us will be at a finance subcommittee meeting.
And can I ask, sorry, now I'm asking just norms. Is it rude? Like I was trying to decide, is it rude to show up at 6? Like I just got home. I was like, I could jump on, like, it's not rude to come halfway through. Okay. You're,
No, if it's not a subcommittee for which you are a member.
yeah, no, if
You
you
can
just
come and
joined.
go,
you
no
can listen
problem.
in. Okay. Thanks.
So are there any policies you would like for us to take a look at?
I should first learn what you are taking a look at, and then I'm sure there will be some, although, yeah, I'm in learning mode still.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night.